Welcome to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. In every episode, we explore how people from educators and artists to executives and entrepreneurs lead with authenticity, rise through adversity, and share the wisdom they've gained along the way. My guest today has built not one, not two, but several meaningful platforms, and all of them are rooted in deep personal experience. He started as a hospital orderly, then went back to school while working, and eventually earned a doctorate in educational leadership. He then built a career in philanthropy, spanning some of the most respected institutions in Southern California. And then, when a devastating personal moment knocked him sideways, he didn't just recover, he turned it into a movement. Dr. Kerry Neal is the founder and chief change agent of Black Love Reimagined, a nonprofit committed to transforming how Black communities approach love, relationships, and connection. He hosts the podcast Urban Birds and Bees, writes a weekly relationship advice column, and is a regular voice on LA radio. Through it all, he's a father, a DJ, and someone who believes that how we love each other is directly connected to how we lead each other. Dr. Kerry Neal, welcome to Expressions of Leadership. It's so great to have you with us.
It's an honor and pleasure to be here with you, Michele. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Now, Kerry, you were one of the first in your family to earn a college degree. Take me back to what that actually felt like from the inside, not just the achievement itself, but the day-to-day experience of navigating something that nobody around you had done before.
Yeah, that was interesting. Thanks for the question. It was a perpetual existence of being in the suffering from the imposter syndrome. Like, am I supposed to be here? I remember I started at the community college, right? And I took a class. I looked at the schedule, and I was so afraid of failing or thinking I couldn't handle it. It could be overwhelming. I took one class. I remember it was in the summertime. And I passed it like with a B plus or something like that, right? I said, okay, that wasn't that bad. So then I said, let me try another class. And so I did, okay, no. So it was kind of sort of like just, taking baby steps at it. But it was interesting because it's one thing to just start going to college and be the first in your family sort of blaze that trail, right? But the other thing it was just the idea that here I am doing something that's never been done before in my family. And then two, negotiating the landscape of what it means to go to college in terms of like, what does this mean? What do you mean I take so many classes here? I knew nothing. Talk about sort of being dropped off on Mars and asked to find the midpoint of the planet or something like that. So that's what that was like.
And when you were growing up, what did leadership look like in your world?
Wow. Unfortunately, when I grew up, which is in North St. Louis, I lived in a community where it seemed like it was normal for only, every household was sort of led by one person. Well, that was typically the mother. No one father was around. So there was this idea of the mother was always in charge and always in the community. I mean, we had one family on our street, both both parents were in the home. But other than that, everyone's father was somewhere else. And to be honest with you, I thought that was kind of normal. And so I didn't know any better. So there's a lot of things I didn't know. You kind of, check in with some of your friends, watch TV and things like that, growing up watching, like Good Times and some of these other play things. And you sort of get a sense of what it was like to have like a father or what leader was like or how the home should have been. It's like watching TV. And so Brady Bunch, you name it. But sort of like getting it through osmosis and just by, sort of watching things and how things occurred and figuring out, saying, this is how things must be done because it wasn't really directly told to me, so to speak.
So who are the people in your family or community that you thought of as leaders?
Oh, interesting. Well, first of all, I would say my mother. Um, and so also I had uncles. Now that's sort of that's half empty, half full kind of situation. Because on one hand, they were men, and they would like say, "Look, man, you ain't no punk. You need to do this." Blah blah blah. Blah. So that was, you kind of got a sense. Okay, well, this is what men are supposed to do. But on the other side, they were major philanderers. That so there was this sort of divided sort of thing. Now, understand me looking back on it, I'm seeing like I said, well, yeah, that obviously wasn't good. But back then, we all saw me and my peers would all probably looked at this as being okay. So this is what it means to be a man. That just because you got one girl to like you, as many women as you can collect to like you and deceive them, that is a badge of honor, so to speak.
At what point did your understanding of leadership and what it means to lead as a man begin to change?
Okay, so that began to change as I got older and began to understand a lot more things. Now, I should point this out too, because we're talking about leadership, but they were kind of sort of role models by default, meaning that probably there was a void within me as a young boy that wanted a man to look up to. And the men that were around were not, unfortunately, our fathers, but happened to be our uncles. And they didn't have their fathers. So somebody indoctrinated them to think that this is the way to do things, right? But as I got older, I began to see things. Now, because they told me the things, I mean, maybe in the back of my mind, like, say, yeah, this girl's cute and whatever else. But not that I really acted on it, but I began to see things more clearly. Not to mention seeing things in terms of commitment, in terms of even watching the sitcoms on TV, right? So we saw, me and my siblings, we saw where the husband loved the wife and things may not have been always peachy cream. And it did contradict what I was actually experiencing. So at some point, it was like, huh. And as I got older, it began to become more clear. I said, oh, so this is the way it's supposed to be. Oh, the father should be in the home. Just because we grew up that way doesn't mean that's the way it's supposed to be. So understanding what the nuclear family is, at least in a more traditional sense. So.
And then, was there a moment growing up, maybe either a person or an experience or a conversation that planted the seed of who you were going to become?
Mm. So there were some things I did really well. So one of the things, and you probably even know this, but I'm a cartoonist. And so I could draw cartoons very well. So there was always a lot of attention given to my artistic ability, right? And I was also probably more academically proficient than some of my other contemporaries as well. Although people could make fun of you and say, "Oh, yeah, so you a geek or something like that," whatever. Like it wasn't cool to get good grades, and so you didn't really talk about it. So I didn't really realize that. But I think I got a lot of attention around my artistic abilities, and then at some point I moved from St. Louis to Flint, Michigan, to live with my father, who was out of the picture. And so it was interesting, without sort of the baggage of what I grew up with, I was going out to move to a new city. No one knew me. I was typically taller than most of my peers as well. They assumed I had like this athletic prowess going on and everything else. So it was like a new day. So I just kind of went with it and became somewhat of an athletic star in high school and things like that. So, but it was interesting that we were having this conversation. I never thought about it that way because people actually believed in me and believed I could do something. I actually did it, but I didn't really think about it in that sense. It was just that's what I did. But now looking back, yeah, that's what I would say.
And did you still actively engage in the arts and academics even as you were getting more and more involved in sports?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I would do artistic things and actually would sell, make some money on the side. Matter of fact, I remember I would draw these artistic boards and things like that. And one, I would do it for certain people. I even had people steal it from me, so it was kind of cool. I was like saying, "Wow!" While it was kind of messed up, they stole my hard work, but my stuff was worth stealing, right? So it was kind of cool. Um, and then academically, I never felt right about getting a bad grade. When I saw a C, I just said, yeah, that's not good. Now, to no, to the point, look, not that my father was like this total deadbeat. I mean, when I went to go live with him, he was kind of forced to obviously to raise us. I remember I got a C in the class, and it was a class I probably didn't put a lot of effort into. I mean, he got my butt. He said, "Look, what you doing?" So you better start paying attention in class, or else. So it was like, oh, okay, so you do care. So then it was A's and B's from there on out.
And then what prompted you after your high school experience to say, I'm definitely going to go to college and I'm going to pursue something in the medical field?
Yeah. So here's what was interesting, right? So um, my father kind of made it clear to me. He didn't say you got to leave here once you get out, you graduate from high school. He just kind of inferred it. Like he was having a conversation. Hey, so what are your plans after high school? That's, and I read right through that. So okay. So I wanted to go to college, and he wasn't really participating. Saying, hey, you need to look at some school. You need to take the ACT test. We didn't take the SAT. We took the ACT in the Midwest. Any of that. And so I had friends who were going to go in the military. So I remember I went with them, just kind of hanging out. And so, yeah, we got this program. It was some kind of delayed entry program. So I signed up as a junior and said, when I graduated being a senior, I went straight into the Army. So I went to the Army for 4 years. So as I was getting out the Army, or while I was in the Army, it was at this military base, but it was in a city, and this was like nearby Seattle, Washington. Well, I built friends with the people who were in the city, and I saw some of the people who were in the military. Now they had gotten out; they're now civilians, and some of them weren't doing very well. Some of them were just working at car washes, or, I mean, it was kind of sad. I said, "Wait a minute! So you spent so many years in the military, and this is all you're doing? They didn't go to school, whatever else." So I remember talking to some other colleagues that I was in the military with, and said, "Oh no, we're not going to be like this." So that's all the motivation that we needed. So we had a full court press to get out of the military and go straight to college. So that's what it was. So it wasn't so much there was this fixation on going into anything medical or anything like that, but it was like, I'm going to make something of myself. And although I'm not really clear what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to college, even if I'm going to do it scared, which is what I did. We kind of talked about at the beginning.
Well, this idea of finding your own path without a map, you didn't have anyone who had done it before, is both inspiring and also really courageous. We're going to take a short break. And up next, we'll talk about Dr. Kerry Neal's career journey that led him from a hospital room to the halls of philanthropy and what he discovered about himself along the way. Stay with us. Leadership isn't just about strategy, it's about people. The Forward Project helps organizations cultivate strong, adaptable leaders who create thriving workplace cultures. If you're ready to invest in your leadership team, visit www.theforwardproject.co to learn how. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Kerry Neal, educator, philanthropy executive, founder of Black Love Reimagined, and host of Urban Birds and Bees. We're talking about reinvention, purpose, and the unexpected roads that lead us to our calling. Now, Kerry, let's go back to one of your first jobs out of college. You were an orderly at the City of Hope Cancer Hospital, and you were studying psychology at the same time. What were you learning about people, about human nature during those years that you maybe couldn't have learned while you were in the classroom?
So here's what I couldn't have learned. So as a job as an orderly, particularly for an outside orderly for the operating room, right? So, and at City of Hope, they're known for cancer research and treatment. And in many cases, which I still think may be the case, a lot of severe cancer cases would be at City of Hope. So oftentimes when a patient was there and had to go to surgery, they were going to go through something radical. They could lose a limb, obviously a mastectomy, could be a bilateral mastectomy when they remove both breasts. Some people were going to lose a whole bottom portion of their body, could be brain cancer. The lightest thing that we did in surgery probably would have to be a biopsy and see where that would go. Constantly putting in catheters so they could receive chemotherapy treatment. And so, in many cases, I was the first person that the patient would see before they went into surgery, and it dawned on me. I said, wow, I'm probably the most important person this person's going to see today because I'm the first person that they're going to see today. And it was always a thing of mine. I would put them on a cart and it would be like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. I would roll them up to surgery, make sure they put them in a pre-op area, make sure they had warm blankets. The nurse came and started her pre-op activities. And so I was always really moved by people, particularly when they were at a pretty vulnerable place. And there are times I would ask, hey, can I pray with you really quick? Is there anything I can do to say to Martha, say it's going to be okay, whatever else? And, this was people of all races. And some people would take my hand, some say, yeah, please pray with me. And so I was, again, the person before they went into that radical procedure. And I remember one day just walking through the hospital, and this lady, she stopped and said, excuse me, are you Kerry, right? I said, I didn't recognize her for anything. Because, when they take a patient, they have like a little bonnet on their head and things like that. And then they're laying down. And then I had we always have scrubs on. But she recognized me. She said, I want to let you know that you prayed for me. And I want you to know that the biopsy came back clear, no cancer. I really, really want to thank you. And it was like, wow, I could see I was really making an impact on people's lives. So I didn't have like the prestigious job of having been a surgeon or something like that. I wasn't an anesthesiologist. I wasn't a plastic surgeon or anything like that. I was, in all fairness, probably the bottom of the totem pole in terms of importance, in terms of actual position, in terms of pay, prestige and whatever else. But I saw myself in a position to like, wow, I can make an impact on people's lives, even as an orderly. And I took full advantage of that. And it was interesting. People that were kind of got around that they said, this guy's kind of different. And so it was interesting. I was invited as in I was getting ready to graduate. I was having a year left. And there was a lady, her name is Ina Fleming at City of Hope. And she was over the uh, risk department at City of Hope. There was called something risk. And so they said, when you get your degree, come back because I have a job for you. And she hired me as a patient advocate. And so as a patient advocate, I would go around and make sure the patients were okay and things like that, whatever else. And then from there, it was interesting. They said, work so well with people, you should work in development. I didn't know what development was. It just sounded kind of cool. I said, okay. I interviewed for the job, got the job, didn't really fully understand it was a fundraising job, but they just knew I was great with people. They felt I would be successful in. So that's how that path went.
And you've moved through very different institutions: City of Hope, University of California, Riverside, and the Pasadena Art Center. What did crossing between those worlds teach you about how leadership actually shows up differently depending on where you are?
I learned, what's interesting, particularly at City of Hope, but probably more so when I got to Riverside. And I remember her name was Pam Hillman, and she's retired now. But I remember she was very approachable. She was a very powerful woman at UC Riverside. And she saw something in me. And she said, something, we're going to place you here. This is what it's going to do. And she began to talk to, she had like over 100 people reporting to her. I remember she always made time to talk to us and make sure that we were okay. And one that I mentioned to her, I said, Pam, you're pretty awesome. I mean, you're approachable, but you're just a very important lady here at university. And she said something to me. She said, you know, you're not a leader if no one's following you. And so that stood with me where it was like, okay, that makes sense to me. So she wanted to be pliable enough where she could lead, but she wanted to make sure that she could have connectivity with the people that she was leading. And that meant for her, she would talk about mistakes that she made. She took input from the team. She didn't feel threatened by the fact someone came with a brilliant idea that we would use strategically to advance our efforts and things like that. And I just watched her, and everybody loved her. And no one gave her a hard time. We were one of the highest performing team, and I learned a lot, not just about the fundamentals of what it meant to be a philanthropy executive, but how what leadership kind of looks like. And it's not about I'm in charge, you do what I say, but about really being more human, that you walk alongside people, not behind them. Or you go do this and come back and report to me, but I will go with you. This is our responsibility.
And philanthropy has historically been this space that has been dominated by white men. You've watched that change and have been part of creating that change. What has that looked like from where you sit, and what really still needs to shift?
Yeah, I remember one day I was working at one institution early in my career. I remember the dean I worked for in the business school saying, okay, I spoke with this particular donor prospect, the CEO of a bank, and said, so it's time to close the deal, go and meet with them. And we just want to find out what his status is on making a generous gift of $1 million. So I went, had a conversation, shook his hand, and he sized me up from the moment I got there. It was pretty obvious. It was a Caucasian male. And when I remember I asked him for $1 million, he almost looked at me like, you could see in his eyes, said, who do you think you are asking me for money? It's like, how dare you? Like, you know, so that was sort of so interesting. So, and that was some years, about 15 years ago. So today, while there may be some residual of that existing, what's shaping all this is that the profile of today's donor is radically shifting. Today's donor, particularly when you look at the multi-million dollar donor, there's an increasing number of women who fall into the space now, particularly minority women. They're oftentimes a bit women, but they're individuals who are younger. You consider the acceleration of technology and things of that nature, Silicon Valley, et cetera, et cetera. And the priorities in terms of what they find important in terms of um, their stewardship activities have radically shifted. For instance, so it would not be uncommon from back in the day, if you're going to be given a multi-million dollar gift or some large donation of any size, you probably met by the president to take you to a nice dinner and all this smoozy stuff because you're very important. Well, that's radically changing. Now it's not uncommon for you to see someone who is minority, who's female, that doesn't look like the historical multi-million dollar donor. And they want to know about, I don't want to necessarily meet with the president. I don't care about eating caviar on a yacht and feeling about run a bunch of people. I'm more moved. Who's the person behind this effort, this particular initiative? So maybe the program director, the lead researcher, the principal investigator who's leading a particular research effort that makes us say, for instance, that the donor's interested in. They want to meet that person. Then they want to meet how they're inspiring students. So they want to meet those students. And then they want to understand the measurable impact that they're making and how their money contributes to this incredible impact that they're doing with their charitable dollars. And then they want to be involved in some way, form, or fashion. It's a seismic shift in the way philanthropy has changed. So, and I think a perfect case of that would be we can look at Mackenzie Scott. Mackenzie Scott is on record being the most generous donor in U.S. history. She went to Princeton. She was influenced and moved by who was the author that was name escapes him. But anyway, she was influenced by a black author, and she began to learn about inequities. Her philanthropy is totally driven by diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she has a bullseye on all programs that are doing this kind of work. So she gives back to HBCUs and other maybe grassroots organizations now. But here's how she does it. She doesn't let you know she's going to meet with them. She has advisors that goes and does the research that here are the organizations doing this type of work that you're most passionate about. And then in her stealth way of doing things, she becomes a secret Santa, and you'll wake up the next morning. Let's say you deal with a women's battery shelter. You wake up the next morning, you get a check in the mail for $10 million. You don't know she's coming. She doesn't want you to smooch her. She don't want to partake in your exclusive parties. She just wants to make an impact, and she doesn't want the recognition. She is exclusively concerned about impact. And here's what's very interesting. You would think because she went to Princeton, that she obviously give money to Princeton. She's given this much money to Princeton.
Which for those listeners is zero.
Zero, not one red cent. So she's following her passion. And I think that's we should pay attention to that, just in generally speaking, that people who may work in philanthropy, you really have to understand what's important to the donor, not necessarily what you think what the donor wants. And so again, because the landscape of those who actually have access to these multiple millions of dollars, they can be very different from what we are used to seeing over the years.
And then you described a moment at one point when you realized that you needed to choose work that aligned with your values. What brought you to that realization, and what shifted once you made that choice?
Well, what's interesting, when I was selecting my undergrad major, as you mentioned in the bio, I majored in psychology, because to this day, I am always interested and intrigued what motivates people to do what they do. What is the driving, what is the catalyst behind their behavior? So, and so growing up the way that I did, seeing an image, why they're doing all this stuff and whatever else, and this is supposed to be the way, but why it doesn't feel good and this and that and whatever else. So I am always interested in getting behind the scenes of who a person is. As a matter of fact, it's hard for me to even have real connectivity with a person. The people who I would say my closest friends are people who are willing to take the mask off, so to speak. You know what I mean? That they just don't keep on saying, "Oh, it's a great day today," but they are willing to say, "You know what? I'm kind of struggling today because blah blah blah," or "My finances aren't as well," and they feel comfortable in their skin to to say that. I mean, of course, you just don't say it to anybody, but the fact that they would be willing to say that. So I think what kind of shaped my focus in terms of what I'm going to do and what my calling is totally driven by the curiosity of the unknown that manifests itself as human behavior. And because I saw these conflicting messages in terms of love, relationships, and things like that, and then my own personal failures in the same space, it was time to really take the bull by the horns and do something about it, which obviously birthed the movement of the nonprofit organization that you mentioned in my bio.
That shift from doing a job to living a purpose, it sounds really simple, but we all know it definitely is not. We're going to take a brief pause, and when we come back, Kerry shares the story behind Urban Birds and Bees and how one painful chapter became a 15-year movement. Don't go anywhere. True transformation starts from within. The Forward Project partners with organizations to create meaningful culture shifts and develop leaders who inspire real change. If your team is ready to move forward with purpose, visit www.theforwardproject.co. You're listening to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today's guest is Dr. Kerry Neal, founder, educator, and someone who's made a life's work out of turning personal truth into public purpose. Now, Kerry, I want to ask you about the story behind Urban Birds and Bees, the personal moment that sparked it, because you've been pretty open that a relationship decision had what you called catastrophic consequences. What did that period teach you about yourself as a man and as a leader?
Yeah, so it was it taught me that it taught me a few things. It taught me that I had some character issues. It it sort of made that very clear that I had some character issues. It told me that I bought into the hype behind women are kind of dispensable. Um, and it showed me that, oh, so all that stuff that I saw growing up, and because I want to make this very clear, I'm taking full responsibility. But I have to believe that from seeing from a young boy, sort of being shown that, you know, just use women for sex and as much as you want is was still in my system, so to speak, right? And be more clear, more transparent on your podcast. I was dating this woman, and at some point, I was like, yeah, I think I want to believe because I thought she was okay, but I didn't want to keep dating her because I didn't really like her like that. But instead of just having an honest conversation with her, I just ghosted her, meaning that I just stopped calling her and so forth. So, and then a few months passed, and she gave me a phone call, and I felt pretty bad. So she's calling. She's probably going to call me to give me a piece of her mind because I hadn't called her in so long. And she was very nice. She said, "Hey, you want to come over for dinner?" And I'd say, "Well, okay, why don't I just go over there? She didn't curse me out and anything like that. Maybe a nice reconnection." So I went over there, and it's my opinion that she had all things in her mind. And one thing led to the other. Well, she called me 30 days later, and a child resulted from that. And I remember having the phone call with having a conversation with because I was divorced. I was married once, and then I had children, but this is a relationship I had after my marriage. Um, Having to tell them they're going to have a sibling from someone that wasn't their biological mother, and the stunned look in their face um, hit me very deep. Not to mention, they obviously the kids grew up, they played football and sports and things of that nature. And because I had this child with another woman, I was in and out of court. I lost a lot of time with my children. I lost a lot of time going to see my sons play football and going to a game. And even as adults today, they'll tell me, yeah, that kind of hurt. I would look up, I would see mom, but I wouldn't see you because I had to take care of the small child. And the ripple effect of that bad, selfish decision. And, I'm not going to say, well, she tried to set me up and things like that. She didn't put a gun to my head. I could have just told her, like a man, hey, listen, you're a nice girl. I'm not interested. I'm going to move on. Wish you best luck in your quest for love. Instead, I did the thing of it's just another conquest. And so I had to really think about what brought me to that point to do something like this. And I remember talking to some of my friends that came over. I told them about what had happened. And what's interesting, they had very similar, I mean, they didn't necessarily get the woman pregnant, but how, they were philandering women as well. And they wanted to make a clean break of that as well. One day I had like a party over my house. So some of my friends came over, male friends, and then some of the women came over. And we all began to talk. And so um, we we discovered when we all got honest and stopped pointing the finger that if we create sort of this emotionally safe space, that we'll share our truths. And it's not necessarily that the other person is doing us wrong, but we make a lot of bad decisions. And a lot of times it's influenced by what we saw growing up and other factors, right? And so that kind of what sparked the movement to the current organization, obviously the podcast. But I think what I continue to do is I look inward. I'm very clear that if we begin to make decisions um, from a very true place from our North Star, from who we are, and be honest about that, which may mean you need to go to therapy to kind of work through some of those things. There's an old saying: if there's no enemy within, the enemy on the outside can do us no harm. We got to stop blaming other people. A lot of things we get ourselves into. I mean, there may be some things that may just kind of fall upon us. I hear that. But a lot of stuff is driven by our bad decision making. Your problem is not you're not on enough dating apps. The problem is that you're dating in trauma patterns that you haven't addressed. And because you haven't addressed that, the name changes, everything else changes, but the behavior is the same. You continue to trauma bond with other people because you're not doing the inward work. So I'm very clear of the importance of the inward work and what that does, because if you don't, it's going to have major consequences on your life.
And what did facing that actually change for you?
Well, it helped me make better decisions, which is the basis of everything that I do on the podcast and with our organization, is to arm people, not tell people what they should do, but it's arming people with information so they can make better decisions. Meaning that if you want a certain outcome, okay, if you want love in your life, if you want to stop having relationships that aren't fulfilling, maybe you should look at something other than the fact that they make a lot of money or that they're very beautiful. Maybe you should get a sense of who they are as a person and get a sense of what their character is like. Maybe you should look at how they treat other people in addition to the way that they treat you. Let's look at some things that's not necessarily good to have to be on a resume. I guarantee you that most people didn't get a divorce because someone didn't go to college or didn't have a six-figure job. Most of the time, divorces or breakups is a byproduct of bad decisions that are character based. And a lot of times, and I don't know why we stay on this hamster wheel, we continue to look at people based upon the aesthetics of who they are rather than who they really are as a human being. And I think we continue to find ourselves in cornrow. So what that did for me, it helps me to be very clear in anything I talk about in my writings, when I'm on a podcast, like now, I'm on a TV show, if I'm on the radio, wherever it is, when I'm writing my weekly article, the news, I'm always talking about everything's going to be birthed out personal accountability, because you're always going to meet somebody that's not a good fit for you, but it doesn't mean you have to go down that road.
And so you've raised four kids. You're still currently raising a teenager.
Right.
How has fatherhood shaped your understanding of what leadership really means?
So I also understand now the level of patience that's needed in leadership. And let me explain that. Patience in terms of understanding people are actually human, which means they're not perfect. And so being careful how you handle people's imperfection, being careful in terms of what it means to speak to them in the midst of their imperfection. And oftentimes, it's a byproduct of looking at myself, what I went through in the midst of my imperfection. Um, and then it's also important for me as a leader to always create what I characterize as psychological safety within the team I'm leading. So whatever the case may be, there's a old saying that this was Peter Drucker, who many regard as the father of management, and he said this. He said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. That oftentimes we get so caught up and make sure the organization runs and things like that, that we're not really cognizant or aware of what's going on with the people and the environment that they work in. And that's the first thing that we need to do. So understanding the humanness of people, the imperfection of people, and how that actually can be a catalyst to change, to reaching goals, and to actually bringing people together.
Well, perfection is an illusion. Being imperfect is human. And it's actually that humanity that creates the most meaningful connections.
Yeah, it's kind of like a secret sauce almost. I mean, imagine someone who's well accomplished, and let's say they're a leader, let's say they're president of a company or whatever else, and all they talk about is the extraordinary accomplishment they've done, and as if they've never, ever, ever had anything that they've done wrong. And I think what we're seeing nowadays, with the platforms such as a podcast, that people are now being much more authentic about their journeys, and they're talking about what it takes to get to a certain plateau and things that we wouldn't normally have this sort of information. So this is whether you're a parent raising kids, it's good to tell your kids that, you know what? Yeah, I made some pretty dumb mistakes as well. I can tell you not to do that because I did the same thing as well. And I just think there's something about being authentic. And I think to be human is to be frail, is to have those moments, missteps and things of that nature. But what can we learn from them? And I think that's what's really important. We're going to make mistakes. There are going to be things that we're going to have to, but what can we do to arm ourselves so we can improve better while dignifying the sanctity of the human experience in the process? So,
We're going to take a short break, and when we return, we'll dive deeper into how Kerry defines leadership itself and the vision that's quietly been driving everything we've been talking about. We'll be right back. Are you looking to connect with an audience passionate about leadership, growth, and success? Become a sponsor of Expressions of Leadership and align your brand with inspiring conversations that make an impact. Contact us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com to explore sponsorship opportunities. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and we've been walking through a life of reinvention, resilience, and purpose. Now I want to get into how Dr. Kerry Neal thinks about leadership itself. So, Kerry, how do you define leadership for yourself today? And how is that definition different from how you might have answered that question 20 years ago?
oh, easily. The ability to be relatable. I used to think that, okay, let me show up and let me not people see my scars or my imperfections, or let me use a much more broader, more sophisticated vocabulary. And particularly being a doctor, let me kind of show you how smart I am and things like that, how much insight I have. And the way that you move people, that you connect to people, and when people connect, is they can relate to you. That means there's a need to be vulnerable. Okay. And let me describe what vulnerable is in my definition. Vulnerability is the willingness to share unflattering things about yourself that, from my perspective, is unflattering. I mean, I may say something and someone may say, well, that's not a big deal. But my willingness to share what I perceive as unflattering about me, but I do it anyway, even at the risk of being rejected. So again, sharing my personal frailties, even at the risk of being rejected. So I recognize that sometimes I may be vulnerable about something. Someone would say, man, you did that? What? But how could you do? Because whatever it may be. But I would rather be authentic and let you know who I am, appropriately speaking, obviously, right? But I would rather you understand who I am in the truest sense, so you know who you're dealing with. And so when I say certain things, as a leader, as a father, whatever the case may be, that it's understood. And again, it is the secret sauce of life to be relatable and to be vulnerable. And I think a lot of people still struggle with that. They feel as though they have to have this pristine disposition and aesthetic, and it is not true.
And your work actually sits at that intersection of leadership and love and relationships. How do you see that connection between them?
Yeah, so I just think that, well, first of all, everyone wants love. Clear that, you may not definitely be married, but everyone wants to be loved and wanted. Um, Not everybody really wants to be real. Not everyone wants to really be authentic. And the truth is, you really can't experience true intimacy unless there is a chance you can get hurt. So it's interesting. We put up walls to protect ourselves, but it's like we're trying to reach around the walls and get the hug. And you really can't do that. You got to let the wall down, and there's got to be a possibility of you being hurt, but that's part of the human experience. Somehow we've gotten to our mind that avoiding pain is the secret sauce to living a wonderful life. And it's not. I mean, there's nothing that we've gone through in life from learning to walk as a baby. We fail a number of times, but we got to walk. I mean, somehow pain, disappointment is a part of the journey. And I'm not saying that we seek out pain and disappointment, but we need to understand that that is an integral part to the human experience and to experiencing the fullness of life.
And then you've called yourself the chief change agent,
Right.
not executive director, not CEO. So that was a really deliberate choice.
Yes, it was.
What does that title say about how you see your role and what you're actually trying to do?
Yeah, so I would like to be seen as a person who embodies change, right? Um, and I will talk about the unflattering things about me that got me to this point. So I went through this metamorphosis, and here I am today, and I'm still going through this. I haven't reached my pinnacle by any stretch of imagination. I still have areas in my life I'm still working on. But I think it's important for me to not try to flex the fact that I'm leading an organization like that's some badge of honor, but I am a person who is um, a symbol of blazing a new trail for a new life and new possibilities. I've gone through it myself. I see the need for it in other people, and I'm very clear that's what we need in our world today. So I'd like to leave with the fact that I am here with, if I'm showing up somewhere, I'm showing up as a change agent, period, regardless, no matter what the reason is. On your podcast, at my 9 to 5, somewhere to enjoy myself, doesn't make a difference. I'm constantly, perpetually in the space of looking at opportunities to make an impact on our world to make it a better place.
Well, I love that. And I know we need that. We're going to take one final break. And when we come back, Kerry shares what he hopes is still ahead for himself, for Black Love Reimagined, and for the people he's trying to reach. Don't miss a thing. Follow Expressions of Leadership on your favorite podcast app and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. You're listening to Expressions of Leadership with me, Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today's guest is Dr. Kerry Neal, founder, educator, DJ, father, and one of the most thoughtful voices that I've encountered on the intersection of love and leadership. Kerry, when you look at the future and the broader landscape of relationship health and community wellness, what are you most hopeful about?
Obviously, there's the organization Black Love Reimagined. And so the initial cause or the catalyst behind Black Love Reimagined was to address the number of dysfunctional things taking place within the Black community. I mean, even on a macro level, you look at different groups. It's unfortunate when it comes to family related statistics and trends. We tend to be at the very adverse circumstances in many of those. But I think what's really important for me is to understand this is a human condition, and although it may be driven more prominently than others, um, I am now at a place where I'm now intentionally broadening the scope of this reach. So, in over fashion. Even with my pocket Urban Birds and Bees, sometimes you're urban, you think, well, so urban, that means Black people. No, urban doesn't mean Black people. It means a dense city, so to speak. So it's about the things that take place in the places where we live. So one of the things I think is really important for me is continuing to have the hands on the pulse of what goes on in my community and change some things where I live and for my people. But I'm about all people. So I really want to be intentional about making sure that these tools and these opportunities for transformation is accessible to any and everybody. So that's really important to me.
And when you think about your own legacy, what comes to mind for you?
Oh, that's a good question. So I want to leave the imprint that Kerry wasn't perfect, but he was really passionate about seeing everyone do better, including himself. And so I want to leave that, want that mark to be first resonate with my kids, right? Because as they grow up and start their families, And unfortunately, obviously you wouldn't know this, but on my side of family and my children's mom's side of family, there are generations and generations of divorce, um, or some kind of situation where the man's not around. And so I want to break that cycle. So I'm starting in my household first, and I want to see that happen on a much more broader scale. So we'd like to scale this to other communities and other families as well. Um, but not even just for just the transactional man being present in the home. I think it's important that there's a healthy relationship of the man in the home, that the man and the woman can coexist, and obviously we're talking about heterosexual relationships in this regard, that they're in the home together and they are navigating their difficulty together, and they're not trying to escape it or trying to find other outlets. And if they do sidestep their commitment, that they find their way back and say, okay, you know what? Let's reboot this. Let's do this over. Let's make let's make it normal practice to go to therapy. It's not uncommon that in many minority communities that uh, the mental therapy can be looked down upon. Mental health, I should say, mental health and therapy can be looked down upon. That we need to normalize that. If we go to the hospital and go to the doctor to get our bodies checked, it might be important to see what's going on in our head and how we have suppressed things from our childhood that is manifesting itself in us as adults. The things that happen to us as little kids don't just go away. Our bodies just grow, get bigger, but the needs of that child is still there. And the way it presents itself and the way that it's exposed, it just doesn't, we don't ask for a pack of 9 liters in the ice cream cone. May we ask for love from a person that's very dysfunctional, who clearly is emotionally unavailable to give that, but you still hang around them. But that need is there. So,
Well, for listeners who want to follow your work or learn more, get involved in some way, where should they go?
oh, easily. Okay. So, well, first of all, Instagram is easy to follow me. You can follow me at Dr. Kerry Neal, say DrKerryNeal. And that is also a website that takes you to my page and whatever else. And then there's Urban Birds and Bees. Now, go to Instagram, it's underscore Urban Birds and Bees. And you just write that out, Urban Birds and Bees. And then also we're on YouTube. Just look up Urban Birds and Bees podcast, catch the shows. And you can also go to urbanbirdsandbees.com as well for more content and things of that nature. And the same for Black Love Reimagined. The sign up, we do a weekly blog. I write a weekly blog and a weekly newsletter that we send out. So with all kind of tips and things like that in terms of dating, relationships, and things like that. It's good for anybody, right? But there is sort of a sense that we prioritize things going in the Black community. But that's Black Love Reimagined on Instagram. So you can find us there as well.
Well, now it's time for our wisdom and whimsy segment of the show, where I get to ask the guest one advice question and one fun question.
Okay.
So let's start with the advice question. What's one piece of advice about love and leadership that you find yourself coming back to no matter what the conversation is?
Never take anything for granted. Just because you think you know something, get people on the record. It is my understanding this is what you're saying. So always clear communication is paramount.
Very wise words indeed. And now it's time for our fun question.
Okay.
I know you're a DJ,
Right.
so I have to ask, if you could DJ the soundtrack to one moment in history, what moment would you choose and what would you play?
Hmm. You know, I think about when Rodney King was being beat down, and someone just happened to be recording it, right? And so that kind of started a whole movement and things like that. And I thought it was interesting that I remember they asked Will Smith, the actor Will Smith, about the whole situation. He said it's not that this is new. This is just now being recorded. like it's been going on all the time. And I think about that song, it was back in the 80s that Michael Jackson was on. The guy named Rockwell, Watch Me. I always feel like somebody's watching me. I'll be spinning that song. Yeah.
Well, from the hospital room at City of Hope to gathering where people first started talking honestly about love to a nonprofit that has been quietly changing lives for 15 years, your journey is an incredible reminder that the most powerful leadership often begins with the most personal reckoning. And I'm so grateful that you brought all of that into today's conversation. So thank you for being here, Dr. Kerry Neal.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure.
Well, if this episode stirred something in you, please follow Dr. Kerry Neal and his work. All the links will be in the show notes. And also, please share this episode with someone who needs to hear it because this kind of conversation deserves a wider audience. You can also follow Expressions of Leadership on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and catch us every Saturday and Sunday on Radio Evolve Santa Barbara at radioevolve.rocks. This is Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and I'm inviting you to lead with clarity, curiosity, and the courage to do the right thing, even when the work is personal. If you haven't done so already, make sure to click on that follow button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have a guest you'd like us to interview? Questions, ideas, or just want to say hello? You can reach us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com or connect with us on Instagram or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks to our amazing team behind the scenes for making this podcast possible, including our sound engineer, Graham Palmer, and my chief encourager and advisor, Jeremiah Higgins.